One of the big claims that anti-trans advocates will make when it comes to the reliability of research in healthcare concerning trans people is that there's no good studies on whether or not gender affirming care actually works. Now, this is a outright lie. There are like a million studies that consistently demonstrate its effectiveness. So usually what they do is they shift the goalposts like constantly, where they do this like okay, well, all right, well maybe it's fine for adults but not for kids. Like, oh, okay, well maybe this all the research on the effect on kids is good, but actually like none of these studies are good enough. And and eventually you get down to this level of like granular critique where you're holding trans affirming healthcare to a higher standard than we do basically any other medical procedure, where like, oh, hip replacement surgery may have like a 13% regret rate, but in order for trans affirming care to be viable, it has to have like a 0.01%. How many people have I talked to on stream where I asked them what an acceptable regret rate would be, and they'd be like, I don't think a single person should regret. It's like, well, then what? Then you don't believe in anything. There's no, not even just healthcare. There's no anything anyone can do that has a 0% regret rate. What do you think humans are or do? Like, it's not possible. But I've heard that from multiple people, which means that, of course, their issue isn't actually the viability of trans healthcare. They just hate trans people, you know? So anyway, to add to the increasing mountain of evidence in favor of the viability of trans healthcare, this from the excellent Aaron in the Morning website. Again, fantastic place to get trans-related news. New randomized trial shows trans care lowers suicidality. Now, I've talked a lot about transness in its, I guess its sociological form on stream, and the idea of it being kind of this abstract refutation of assigned gender at birth, and I stand by that broadly. But I want to talk specifically about gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria can come from a bunch of different places. Like, I've said before that I feel like there are at least two kinds of gender dysphoria, because there are people who, if they were born in the middle of a forest away from all humans and were raised by wolves, would look down at how their body is and feel uncomfortable with it. And that's like this innate, like, if anything, that's like sexual dysphoria. That's like it's like literally like a brain body thing. You know what I mean? And then there are people who have dysphoria in more of a social sense, where maybe if they were just like raised in a forest with no human contact, they would be fine with their body. But in the context of interacting with other humans, they feel discomfort. And, whether or not anyone is one or the other is really tough to tell, because none of you were raised in the forest. At least I hope not. That doesn't really seem safe or sanitary. But talking about the dysphoria specifically, in the DSM right now, dysphoria, gender dysphoria, is considered to be a mental illness. Being trans is not considered to be a mental illness. The dysphoria is, because a mental illness categorically is some mental state of affairs which weighs negatively on someone to the point that it interrupts the regular proceedings of their life. And I think for many trans people, gender dysphoria is that. Not all trans people. There are some trans people are out there waving their dicks around, having a grand old time. This is great, whatever. But in the context of gender dysphoria being thought of as a mental illness, which is a designation that I personally think is fine and valid, I think it meets the same criteria that we use to call, say, depression or anxiety mental illnesses. I think that's fine. Again, transness isn't the mental illness, because if that was the case, they would be trying to correct the transness, whereas trying to correct the gender dysphoria usually involves transitioning. So in that case, being trans isn't the disease, it's the solution, or at least actualizing the desires of a trans person is the solution to the disease. And in fitting with that, lowers suicidality significantly. Now, this is obviously huge. I can't read right now, but if I remember correctly, this was a randomized control trial and sample. You have a group of trans people receiving care and a group not. And the difference was, okay, I'm going to have to look in real quick. The treatment group receiving care saw a 55% reduction in suicidality compared to 5% of control. 55% versus 5%. So the control group, which were not receiving gender-affirming care, 5% reduction. Over a 50% reduction for the group receiving care. This is, if this is not a certifiable medical success, then I don't know what to tell you. If you had any drug, any treatment, anything that got results like this in the context of mental health and suicidality is a very difficult thing to treat, by the way. Physical symptoms are very empirically measurable. Is a bone broken or is it not? Is a patient bleeding or are they not? Even with things like depression, you know, people can sort of categorize their days. Are you feeling better this day or are you not? Suicidality is very complicated. It's possible for people who feel good to feel suicidal. You guys see the recent Barbie movie, for example? There's a lot of like weird kind of non-intuitive you know, sometimes it doesn't always make sense exactly. So seeing significant reductions in suicidality is massive. And we have such a clear case here. Over what time period was the study done? Let me see if I can, yeah. Suicidal risk is very difficult to assess in psychiatry. It's just a complicated subject. But people are more depressive than ever. It's very important to get a handle on these things. Let me see if I can. I'm looking very closely at the monitor here. Researchers in Melbourne studied 64 transmasculine individuals. Oh, look at that. That's interesting. This research seems to be done on transmasc people. Usually it's done on transfemme people. I've noticed that in the past few years, the conservative rhetoric has shifted to focus more on trans men in a whole, like, our weak, vulnerable daughters are being groomed into cutting their tits off, you know, which definitely isn't weird framing when it comes to, like, mental health and the care associated with it. So I think it's interesting that they would do that. The treatment group received their Substack. The treatment group received their gender-affirming care within a week, while the control group waited 3 months. Both groups were evaluated for only 3 months? Wait, this study took place over only 3 months? This wasn't even like years and years and years of like follow-ups or whatever? We're literally talking about a difference of 3 months? The findings were striking. Suicidality scores halved for the treatment group, but remained unchanged for... Dude, this is such a slam dunk medically. Yeah, that's it? Faster access to gender-affirming care? Literally like a 3-month difference. And that's the result that you get? Jesus Christ. Depression scores also decreased by half in the treatment group. Additionally, gender dysphoria scores diminished for those receiving treatment. Look, I never doubted for a moment the viability of these treatments, but I'm always shocked by how obvious it all is, you know? And you're still going to have your bad faith, you know, oh, there's not enough evidence, people like Jesse Singal, who, if I recall correctly, I was supposed to debate. Did I lose that email? I need to work on that. It'll happen. I think Jesse's always raring for a chance to go. I think it'll be... Yeah, I got to get on that. There will always be bad faith hucksters like him who whine that the 57 trillion studies that all say the same thing aren't enough. But just, if ever you feel any doubt in your heart, just remember stuff like this, okay? It makes people's lives better, and when people like that take the opposite position with no evidence to back their claims, they are the pro-death party. You know, they are death cultists. They want people to die for no reason. Well, for a reason, of course. They want them to die because the alternative would be to support degeneracy, which I don't find to be a very convincing argument. You know, I wish more of them were more upfront in saying that. You know, the Nazis will just say that. They'll just say, I think it's general. But like sometimes the people, they'll dance around it. And that's what they mean, of course, you know. Tim Pool said it earlier about Obama. Like when the mask slips, they'll say it, but you know, they play this game. Fascists love their games with words. Wonder what the effect is when we measure over years. Could there be an increased lowering of suicidality? Well, I'm sure that is consistent with the research that I have seen, certainly. You know, A lot of the suicidality and depression that comes along with being trans isn't actually a gender dysphoria thing, it's a social mistreatment thing. And the gender dysphoria can exacerbate it because the negative things people say about you can be exacerbated by the negative feelings you have about yourself. So, if, for example, you go on HRT or whatever and you correct a lot of the things that you dislike about your body, maybe people on the outside are still being mean to you, but then you can think, oh, well, look at how great my ass looks. And that can soothe the negativity somewhat. There are probably quite a few trans people who would be perfectly fine in the bodies that they just grew into if it wasn't for all of the social expectations associated with people of given sexes and the treatment and the so on. Of course, that doesn't mean that you can just magically wave a wand and sort of correctively make people okay with their bodies, right? There's no negativity associated with transitioning. It's fine. It doesn't hurt people. It does the opposite. It helps people. It lengthens lives. So I wish I could go live in a hut in the woods away from all you lunatics. What? What's the argument? 3% of men have autogynephilia. Only 1% of the population is trans. What is more common? What? Wait, what's happening? Can we get a mod to ban this? No, let them cook. JWC. Wait, I recognize this name. Haven't you been here for a while? Yeah, you've been here for a while. What's the issue? You can't be a long-time VGGer while having negative opinions on trans people. That doesn't make any sense. We're pretty hardline on that one. Yeah, that's all I said. Well, JDubs91, autogynephilia isn't a real thing. The criteria that people use to describe autogynephilia would apply to a significant number of cisgender women. You know, it's a term applied to trans women only to dehumanize and denigrate them, to make them seem degenerate. But if you, like, broadly ask women, hey, have you ever had, like, positive sexual feelings when looking at your body in the mirror or whatever? A lot of them will say, yeah. I mean, I've been with, story time, tea time. I've dated women, and a lot of them find their own bodies kind of sexy, you know? I mean, whatever floats their boat. I'm not into bears, so I don't find my own body personally attractive. Maybe if I was into bears, I would look in the mirror and go like, yeah, looking pretty good. And then I'd think like, yeah, like, would that be like autoandrophilia then? Because it's like, I mean, what's the point here, right? And tons of predators grooming young males into taking HRT for their gratification. Stuff happens. What? This is made up. Why do people, in a world where there are already so many real problems, I don't understand the need to make up more. The idea that people are being groomed into being trans is just, they said this about gay people. They say this every time they say this. If we want to look objectively at the experiences of people growing up, and then we are to ask ourselves, which side uses more social pressure to pull young people into their camp, homosexuals or heterosexuals? The answer is obvious. Day in and day out, every day, every minute, if you are gay and a young person, society puts enormous pressure on you to not be in implicit and explicit ways. We even have a term for it, compulsive heterosexuality. The idea that the understanding of heterosexuality being the norm, the default, the expected, the normal, the good, is so ingrained that people will just gravitate into it, even if they're unconsciously repressing homosexual tendencies. It's a real thing. It's why a lot of gay people, especially in my experience, gay women, only realize it when they're in like their 30s or something, outside the mess of it. So to look at all of that and go like, well, the real problem actually is gay people and trans people grooming others into being gay or trans. It's not a real problem. Somewhere out there, is there a gay or trans person who's being needlessly insistent on another person being an egg or being gay or whatever? Yeah, sure. I mean, if you pull the scope back on anything, you're going to see people being obnoxious in any camp. But in terms of like actual social harm, there's no contest. I can't see shit. Well, altogether, I would say that's a good bit of positive information right there.